on.
Good afternoon. We've got a quorum already, so may I now call to order the meeting of the Bills Committee. Please invite the administration in.
咁喺2月4號嘅會
At the meeting on the 4th of February, we had a discussion on paper 511-1213-02. Members gave some comments, and the administration gave some response. So I think we should now continue our discussion with paper 511-02. Any declaration of interest from members? Now, last time our clerk reminded members that it would be better if they could make a declaration before they spoke. Property, all right. Possession of property. Mr. Alan Leung, property. Mr. Tony Chair, I own property, and my business involves property consultancy. Yes, again property. Mr. James Stowe, again property. Mr. Abraham Shek, I own property, and I represent the real estate sector. Leung Chi Chang, right? And then Mr. Wong Kwok Heng. And I myself hold property, and the accountancy firm that employs me may provide taxation-related consultancy service, right? So CB 1511-1213-02, the administration can take us through the paper, and we've also in fact got another paper. So Duncan, please.
Can't get the translation, right?
I didn't get the translation, I'm afraid. No.
Yeah, actually, well, I suggest you continue the last document that you have introduced to us, and also briefly answer what we had question.
Thank you.
The administration last
yes,
time.
in fact, as far as I know, we've responded in writing to the various letters from the Bills Committee Secretariat dated the 6th of February and the 31st of January, respectively. And that sets out the information requested by the Bills Committee at previous meetings. I won't repeat the detail of our response because I think it's in our written replies. But perhaps I can just highlight a couple of points that might be helpful. On the enhancement of the special stamp duty, we'd like to emphasize that special stamp duty has been effective in curbing short-term speculative activities since its implementation in November of 2010. It's been most effective in curbing confirmer cases and resale cases within 6 months. But that said, we have reviewed the special stamp duty in view of the continued exuberant state of the property market, and we note that a number of short-term resale cases, and particularly those resale between 12 and 24 months, have been on the rise. We think this is because properties bought in the early months, immediately after the introduction of special stamp duty, reached the end of the first year of the higher stamp duty rates. That's 10 and 15%. Given the current tight supply situation, we see a need to provide a stronger disincentive for speculators and short-term investors. Accordingly, our proposal is to enhance the special stamp duty by increasing its coverage period from 24 to 36 months and, of course, by increasing the rates for the different holding periods. And the point here, of course, is that it's clear that 10-15% has an effect, but 5% clearly doesn't have a persistent effect. Another area is that a number of people have expressed the view that special stamp duty might lead to a further rise in residential property prices. And indeed, I think a number of the delegates at the last meeting raised this point. We're of the view that special stamp duty will reduce the impact of short-term speculative activities immediately, and it will in turn reduce the risk of a property bubble. with most speculators driven out of the market, the number of flats held by speculators should gradually decrease. As to the genuine home buyers, in general, most will not resell residential properties they acquire within a short period of time in the first place. Therefore, the introduction and enhancement of special stamp duty should not have a significant effect on the supply of flats held by these end users, since they probably wouldn't have been releasing them anyway. So overall, we think that it provides actually a much more stable market, and that's the objective. So therefore, we see no significant impact on the overall supply of property for sale. Now, turning to the buyer's stamp duty, the objective, as I think we've stated, is to accord priority to Hong Kong permanent resident buyers over non-Hong Kong permanent resident buyers under the current market situation. We note that some people have suggested that companies owned by Hong Kong permanent residents should be exempted from the buyer's stamp duty. And I think I need to make it clear once again that it is the policy intent that all companies, regardless of whether the shareholders or directors are Hong Kong PRs, they should be subject to buyer's stamp duty. As we've repeatedly explained, we do not consider it appropriate to exempt company buyers from the buyer's stamp duty. A major concern is that in doing so, we would perhaps lead to the problem that Hong Kong permanent resident shareholders can fairly easily circumvent the buyer's stamp duty through transferring property entitlements to non-Hong Kong PR shareholders and thus seriously undermine the effectiveness of the buyer's stamp duty. Specifically on the suggestion to exempt companies from buyer's stamp duty when they acquire a residential property for redevelopment purposes, I can again confirm that our policy intent is that buyer's stamp duty should not hinder redevelopment. So under the Stamp Duty Amendment Bill 2012, the bill, a refund mechanism is proposed whereby acquisition of residential properties for the construction of immovable property will be exempted from the BSD. But this is provided that the immovable property being constructed is completed within 6 years. I think we've mentioned this before. And we will allow for extensions in specific circumstances. In drawing up this proposal, we've made reference to the land (compulsory sale for redevelopment) ordinance. That's CAP 545. For buyer stamp duty purposes, the general rule is that the 6-year period will start when the relevant developer has become the owner of the entire lot of the redevelopment concerned. Thus, the refund mechanism will take into account all the views expressed by the trade on this issue. For instance, we note that it takes time to acquire properties to be redeveloped. We've therefore proposed in the bill that we don't start the countdown until after the property as a whole has been acquired. I think that gives sufficient flexibility to the industry. One final point. There have been some suggestions that a time limit should be set for buyer's stamp duty. We don't consider that this would be possible because we simply can't predetermine when the market will change the situation and when buyer's stamp duty would be deemed no longer necessary. We will continue to closely monitor the property market and make reference to a basket of indicators, including property prices, housing affordability for the general public, the volume of property transactions, the supply of residential properties overall, and of course mortgage payments and rent-to-income ratios. The demand-side management measures are extraordinary measures. I've said this before, and I have to repeat it, I'm afraid, introduced under the current exceptional circumstances. We will consider withdrawing these measures after the demand-supply situation in the property market has regained a balance. Accordingly, and to allow us to do so quickly, we have proposed in the bill that adjustments to the special stamp duty and buyer's stamp duty rates should be made by means of subsidiary legislation subject to negative vetting by the Legislative Council. And this will give us the necessary flexibility to adjust the applicable rates and indeed to zero if necessary in a timely manner with reference to the market situation. Madam Chairman, we are still coordinating some responses to the other questions that were passed to us by members and the deputations on the 18th of February, as well as questions sent to us by the legal advisor on the 20th of February, and we will revert as soon as possible. But we obviously remain happy to try and answer members' questions here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Mr. James Toh, 5 minutes for each member. All right, 5 minutes. Yes, Chairman. I believe we are on paper 598. And may I refer to Annex 1? This table. How can we look at these figures? And I'm referring to this annex as well as the figures in the annex in paper 511. So can I ask the administration to tell us how we should look at the table in Annex A? I'm talking about paper 598. 598, Annex A, the table. Proportion of short-term resale cases. Annex A, paper 598. Who can answer this question? Mr. Wong? Yes, Chairman. This is paper CB 1598-1213 bracket 02, and then Annex A, Table 1A, proportion of short-term sales. So you can see some resale cases. So from the left, the first column, year. The second column, total number of agreements for sale. Agreements for sale received by the Stamp Duty Office. And then we have this very big heading, resale cases. Now, for example, out of the 9,041 cases in 2010, how many confirmed more cases there were? And then the 3 columns, shorter than 6 months, shorter than 6 months, and then more than 6 to 12 months, and then more than 12 to 24 months, and then 217, 651, 472, 715 up 715 add up to the subtotal of 2055, and this represents 22.73% of 9041. Note 3, all right. Starting December 2010. And then 2011, 96034, the total number from January to December 2011. Again, confirm more cases, less than 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, adding up to a subtotal of 18,006, accounting for 18.75% of the total in 2011. And you can interpret the figures for 2012 in the same manner. If members have no questions on this one, and I will move on to the other paper. So A, total number of agreements for sale. And then subtotal B, resale cases. Resale means resale within 24 months. But then for confirmed more cases, they might also exceed 24 months. Okay, now I understand. B over A. So I'm saying that these are the cases of speculation. Yes, please. No, we will not call them speculation cases, short-term resale. But then it's very likely that they are speculation cases because we don't have a definition in the law on speculation cases. So you're talking about speculation, collection of taxation, anything from Agnes?
So this table doesn't necessarily show speculation cases, but these are cases result from 6 to 24 months. Under the SSD regime, there's a chance that these cases we need to pay SSD. Well, in Note 2, it says there's a chance that the properties might have been bought a long, long time ago and not subject to SSD. So how many of them are we talking about? This proportion is very important. Who's going to respond? Note 2. The table now is made in response to members' request on information of number of resale cases, and we've listed them here. And some of the resale cases may be subject to SSD, but we have not got a detailed breakdown here because you haven't asked us for a detailed breakdown on whether the property involved had been acquired before the first SSD was implemented. So we didn't give a breakdown here because that's not what members requested. Let me give you an example. Is there a chance, maybe an extreme case, that is a person had bought the property for 50 years, and when SSD was introduced in October 2010, he thought the price was right, so he sold it. Would that case be included here? Because you said the resale cases within 24 months after assignment. So if it's a case bought 50 years ago and sold 2011, would that case be covered here? So they said that 24 months means from, look at the 7382 number. Are we talking about properties bought before October 2010? So would it not include cases bought like 50 years ago, Mr. Wong? The figure 7382, like a case bought 50 years ago, that should not be included in the figure here. But for 7382, that's calculated from, that's based on January to December. So that figure of 7382 refers to cases bought from that 2 years before that date. And Table 1B will show you the cases as at end of 2012. Okay, let's look at the tables again. Chair Wai-king. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask NSA. Last time in our discussion, we were talking about why the SSD would be extended from 24 months to 36 months. Is it my analysis? I'm not sure if it's right. It seems to me that with the introduction of SSD, the 6 months and 6 months to 12 months transactions have declined largely. But for 12 months to 24 months, transactions have increased by a lesser extent. I think to me it's not a matter of the time involved, but the rate itself. The tax rate, I think, is a determining factor. To 24 months, in the past, the transactions and changes in the market indicate that the price had gone up. So if it's 5% for 24 months, people would still make a good profit. So I think the biggest issue is if you want to curb short-term speculation, we have to define what we mean by short-term, but now it's like 24 months. Maybe the government thinks that 24 months isn't short-term, so we want to extend it to 36 months. But I don't see why we need to have 36 months. The most important is for you to increase the rate. I think the rate is at the crux of the issue. That's my analysis. And I wonder what the administration thinks about my analysis. And Mr. Pascoe just then mentioned about redevelopment. You said you don't want to see that because of the special stamp duties, redevelopment would be held back, or private developers will be discouraged to take part in more redevelopment. That's why you have this refund arrangement. But personally, I think that even though you said that if you calculate 6 years from the time of acquisition, 6 years after the first act of acquisition, I think sometimes even after 8 to 10 years, acquisition may still be going on. So has the government considered about shortening the period for refunding SSD, that is to after the acquisition of a building has been completed, that is the whole building, the whole block has been taken up, that is, or maybe the development plan has been approved, 15% of stamp duty is quite a lot, because normally properties are acquired by companies. So, and the rate involved would be enough to cover the construction costs. So, property developers actually are shouldering a heavy burden. So, I just want to see whether the government would like to consider my opinions. 2 questions. Duncan, please.
Let me deal with the last one first, if you see what I mean. The trigger for the 6-year count is when they complete the acquisition, not when they start the acquisition. As you're absolutely right, it will take a while, maybe 5 or 10 years even, before they've got the whole of a block or blocks. So we don't start the count until they've done that. That's the first point. I think and I agree with you, that's the appropriate trigger. They've got to acquire the whole thing. The second point, which again I don't disagree with you, is we need to be satisfied that they are doing the redevelopment. So our intention is that when that occupation permit for the first block, if it's a multiple block development, they can apply for the reimbursement at the point at which they get that occupation permit for the first block in the redevelopment. So I think we're actually more or less aligned here.
Yeah, I think, Madam Chairman, I understand what had been proposed by government. But my point is actually because from the start of acquisition, try to merging all strata titles up to 6 year. 6 year, now set the limit, actually 6 year. The 6-year rule actually is completion of the development. Talking about over 10 years. The holding of 15% really, I think, cause a lot of burden on the developers, and that's why that would discourage the private developer in, participate urban renewal projects. This is my point.
I understand the point, and I would suggest that, of course, by now, and presumably from the date at which this announcement was made, many developers will already have secured many of the properties they need. So the chances are this would only apply to the residual, maybe 5% or 10% of properties that they still have to acquire. So it's not as if they haven't already locked up money for a long time. You look at developments in Wan Chai. Some developers have been working on the Wan Chai redevelopment for 20 years.
Yeah, true. If this sort of measure will cease, within a short period of time. But I doubt very much because on the government side, they never said that, how long will this sort of a special tax will cease?
Well, again, we've given a very firm undertaking that this is not a permanent situation. We will be taking it away when the market changes. What I can't do is say when that market situation will change. But I do assure you that this is not a permanent arrangement. It's exceptional for these exceptional circumstances. Madam Chairman, I'm aware of the time, but if you would like, I can perhaps address the other 2 points as well briefly.
I think 而家仲有石禮謙議員，不如等佢先答埋。
Maybe we'll let him answer first. Okay, Abraham Sheck first. Chairman, just then when he answered Mr. Chair's question, he said that when the SSD was introduced, when the acquisition is completed. But I think it's like dreaming. Redevelopment is an ongoing process. It will be ongoing. So when you introduce the policy, I think, are you saying that all redevelopment would stop? Sometimes I think officials, actually, your thinking is out of touch with the reality. You haven't consulted the sector. 6 years for acquisition. But if you want to acquire a few blocks of old buildings, it will take you much longer time. It's not that once you have acquisition one, then you can move on to the next. It will take you not just 6 years, but maybe 16 years before you can recover your investments, and the interest will be compounded. And you know, the 15% and the interest involves a large amount of money. Urban Renewal Authority may be able to do it because he has a plan which is gazetted. And the Gazette covers the redevelopment project, and but that's different from the approach of private developers. So I think that so I'm not pleased with the answer I just heard. And in NSA, James will ask a similar question. I don't know who can answer. Mr. Chair or Mr. Wong could answer. Say if I had a wife who made a deposit for a residential flat, and when she signed the agreement for sale, she added the name of her husband, and would a case like this be included in the table under resale case? Can you answer me this question? So if cases like these are included, then that may explain why the number is so big here. The figure exists as it is now. You know, maybe, you know, and also if you look at the table at the top and at the bottom, for 24 months in 1B, NSA 1B, there's only 1,800 odd cases that is subject to SSD, and it's totally different from the cases above. So I don't really can't make sense of the figures here. SSD, if you look at 1B, table 1B, it's very figures are clear. But if you look back at table 1A, then it's just impossible for me to try. I don't think the figures tally. You know, me as an expert, I can't really quite make sense of the figures. Who is going to answer, Mr. Wong? Yeah, about the figures. I think these two tables were made in response to your request last time. Table A in NSA tells you the number of resale cases within a short period of time, and the table below shows you the breakdown since the introduction of SSD. So that cases that required a special stamp duty. So therefore, the number will be less than the number in the table above, because the first table includes some properties that were bought before the SSD policy was implemented. Chairman, can he answer? What if wife who asked her husband's name on the sale agreement, then would that case be included? Yes. Under existing system, if a wife signs a professional contract and if she asked her husband's name on the formal agreement, these cases would not be included, because so therefore the 91,264 figure does not include cases like that. So after you look at 1A and you look at table 1B, the total transactions in the past 2 years number about, you can see in 2011, 2012, there were about 180,000 transactions. And in 1B, you saw that there were 1,836 SSD cases, and that made up 2% of the total number of transactions. Is it worth all the effort of work just for the sake of 2% of the number of transactions? You can see in 2011, the number of transactions was 96,034, and then it fell to 91,000 odd. And I think the SSD actually has largely reduced the supply of flats. And because of the reduced supply, prices went up. So the SSD actually benefited private developers. In the past 2 years, the supply has been stable, and yet the overall prices went up by 35%. What is the factor? Of course, you can see that the SSD had actually indirectly created a false market that caused more than 180,000 people who bought flats. These people had to buy flats by more than 25% than what they could have bought, the cost that they could have paid. So, and also it reduced the supply of flats.
Respond?
I clearly don't agree with that analysis at all. I think what Table 1B shows is that people have been very rational and they haven't rushed in to resell properties early, which is exactly what we wanted to achieve through special stamp duty. So I would argue this has had its effect. But I would also argue against the analysis that this has in some ways affected the supply in the market. You can see 96,000, 91,000, etc. The number of transactions in the market hasn't been significantly affected. So I disagree with that point.
Madam Chairman, Prescott doesn't need to agree on anything. He only needs to look into the facts. But if he wants to close his eyes to the facts, then it's a different issue. My argument is that the price has actually went up 35% over the 2 years period, 2011 and 2012, and that's a fact. And also is a fact that the primary supply of new flats has remained steady. The supply of secondary flats have actually dwindled down from 155,000 to 96 and 91,000 in the year 2011, 2012. If you add the two together, you can see that there has been a control in the supply, because a lot of the secondary markets, because of this SSD, do not want to put into the market. So because of the limited supply of flats into the market, then the price of flats went up correspondingly. And that is also a fact. But doesn't matter. He doesn't have to agree with me. No government official agree with what I said, but what I said is a fact.
Occasionally I do agree with
Any
Mr.
comment?
Shepherd. Yes.
Duncan.
I think it's actually very, very dangerous to try and equate one measure to the total cause for increase in prices. Let's be frank, the influx of money from overseas is a far, far bigger impact than the small impact of special stamp duty on increase in price. And I would also argue that since all we've taken out are the speculators, the number of flats that are in the market are still in the market. It's just that there are fewer transactions because the speculators aren't involved. I don't agree on the supply side either. But, we'll have to agree to disagree on this one, Madam Chairman.
好，涂謹申議員。
主席，或者我問翻附件一，即係呢個598呢個文件啦。尤其是我問阿黃生啦，即係我頭先跟翻阿石顯議員嗰個問題，就係、譬如話嗰度你有一行啊，即係中文啊嚇，1A 嗰度第三個 column 咧就係確認人轉手啊嘛，你睇到啊 ？OK， 好啊。咁譬如如果我用翻嗰個例子就係、譬如個。
Confirm more cases, right? The wife signs the preliminary agreement, and then in the formal agreement there are two names, the wife and the husband. Then do you regard that as confirmer reselling 50%? That's why we have the figures 883,296. Am I correct, Mr. Wong? No, we haven't taken into account such cases. Why not? Because under the Stamp Duty Ordinance, Schedule 1, for spouses, parents and children, these are regarded as one contract or one agreement. So 296 and 883, maybe the property was acquired a long time ago. But then for confirmed more cases, is it that they were all subject, well, they were definitely subject to SSD? Mr. Wong, now for confirmed more cases, a preliminary or an agreement was signed, but then before the transaction was completed, the property was resold. So we don't take into account whether it's less than 24 months or more than 24 months. I believe most of these cases do not exceed the 24 months period. In other words, most of these cases, I believe, were subject to SSD. Now, can you give us examples of confirmed cases exempted from SSD? Now, for example, A bought a flat and signed the agreement and then sold the flat to B. When A sold to B, when B purchased the flat, whether and we take into account when the sale and purchase agreement was signed. So in other words, under in fact we can't really see too much from table 1A, but then table 1B, 1,800 cases, and Mr. Abraham Sheikh is saying that we're talking about 1,836 cases out of 180 or 190,000. And as to whether SSD is really effective, let's look at Annex A, 2010. The third column, less than 6 months, okay? The third column for 2010. Not all of them were subject to SSD because I've read your note too. December 2010, only 1 month, okay? So, December 2010, 651 cases, less than 6 months. And if I multiply that by 12, that would mean 7,600 cases. 2011, 2,617. 2012, 83. Now, so I am assuming that for the entire year of 2010, 651 times 12, 7,600. But then you can see that 2011, 2012, more likely that it will be subject to SSD. So if you look at the trend, you see that because of SSD in 2012, there were only 83 resale cases, less than 6 months. And I believe out of the 83, 82 were subject to SSD, right? In other words, for resale cases, for possible resale cases, the SSD would suppress the number of such cases, 83 only in 2012. So the government is telling us to increase the 15% 6 months to 20 or 25%, I can't remember. But then look at this column, 83 cases. How can you say that the SSD has lost its effect and so you have to enhance the SSD? 2013, first 2 months. Are you telling me that in fact there were 80 cases in the first 2 months of 2013? I can see from the figure 83 in 2012 that in fact the SSD was extremely successful. So is there really a need to enhance the SSD, dragging down the number from 83 to say 45?
That SSD has been successful, but I think you need to read the column across rather than up and down. So, for example, in 2012, the number of resale cases within 6 months, 83 is still quite small, 168 still quite small, but suddenly it jumps up to 7,000. And I think that very, very clearly shows the diminishing impact the longer you get away from when you originally bought the property. And that's the point that we really need to address. So the essential thing here is if you accept, and I think the figures speak for themselves in this case, that there is still a considerable number of resales within 12 to 24 months, you need to address that problem. So that is the first problem we want to address. We accept that to do so, you need to put the rate up for that period. And if you put the rate up for that period, clearly it has to have a proportionate increase across the board to make it a valid approach. The second question then, and it's the second part of the objective with special stamp duty, is do we think that 12, 24 months is sufficient? Well, we think that, in fact, because of the nature of the market that's been continuously overheated, that we need to extend the cooling effect that we now see from these figures up to the between the 24 to 36 months. So there's two elements here. The first part is we want to enhance the impact in that latter 12 to 24 month period, and we want to continue that impact up to 36 months.
主席一句啫，咁如果係即用你嗰個講法。
But then according to what you say, you should increase the rate for 12 to 24 months and not 6 months or 6 to 12 months. Because for 6 months, 6 to 12 months, the numbers were really very small. But now you're going to increase the rate for 6 months. But then you have to, because you increase one rate, you have to increase the others correspondingly. Is that what you mean?
Saying is that in order to keep the proportional impact relatively the same, if you put the last period, which was previously 5%, up to 10%, then you should naturally increase 10 to 15 and 15 to 20. And that's the approach. And then, of course, the latter period, 10%, if we know 5% has no effect, there's no point in putting it at 5% for the second period.
主席，你嗰個稅率係夠。
So the rate, if the rate is enough to achieve a deterrent effect, that's enough. Now, 15% 6 months, now you can see the figure was extremely small. So I don't think because you increase the rate for 12 to 24 months, you need to increase the rate for 6 months. Why? Because the deterrent effect is enough. It's already there. So can you please consider this point?
Yes, I think the point that we're trying to make here is that we believe that the deterrent effect has been diminishing over time, and the figures actually do show that as well. And that in order to maintain the deterrent effect across the board for both immediate sales below 6 months right through to the 36 months, it has to have an increased deterrent effect, and that's the approach we've adopted.
Right. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I also want to look at Annex A. 2012, 12 to 14 months. Now, I believe some of the cases were not subject to SSD because the SSD started on the 20th of November 2010. And so for the 2012 figure, maybe the property was bought much earlier. But then concerning 1B, you can see the total is only 1,836. So I think you can say that there was a significant drop in the number of resale cases during that period in question. Yes, I understand that you can curb short-term speculation, but that if you extend the period to 36 months, then the supply will be further reduced, and as a result, prices will not go down. On the contrary, prices will go up further. This is really a demand and supply formula. So don't just say, oh, 36 months. If that's not enough, 48 months. And if that's not enough, 60 months. What do you mean by short term? Mr. Pescott has given us the figures. All right. So he merely says if the situation improves. So what is meant by the situation improving? I think you should let the market know what is meant by short-term speculation. What is meant by short-term? And Can the administration tell us that with the policies being implemented within 5 years, the market will become normal again? So we want to have an idea. The market needs to have an idea. So I'm worried as you are extending the period to 36 months. Now, I understand the turnover has been reduced, but then because of a shortage of supply, prices may go up further. Duncan, any comments on the reduction of supply?
These are demand-side measures. They apply to the demand side. They're intended to stop people who have the intention to short sell going into the market at all. It really, to my mind and to our understanding, is not a supply-side measure. The number of units that are available on the market doesn't change significantly because you take out a small number of people buying. It just means that those units are not bought quickly, that's all. But the second point is, honestly, if I knew when the market would turn round, frankly, I shouldn't be in this job. Because I would be able to make big money knowing that information. I don't think anybody knows. However, what I will say is that looking at the economic fundamentals, there is absolutely no question that the market will reverse. There's no question. The market does that. It will reverse. It's just a question of time. If you listen to the commentaries that are coming in from overseas, from the USA and what have you, Mr. Bernanke, for example, is even suggesting that he's going to start moving interest rates up. When interest rates start going up, it will affect the market. Those are the factors that we have to look at. But I would be very unwise to give you a particular time frame because we just don't know.
No, Madam Chairman, what I'm trying to, get from the government side is really, according to your plan, of course, you introduce new measure, try to bring the market to the normal situation. Then, of course, I think in your mind, when you draw up the plan, you must have a target date, or at least.
No,
you think that, roughly, if all this measure is effective, and, subject to changes in the market, other factors, then probably you can achieve what you want within a certain period of time. This is first. And the second point, actually, I'm trying to point out is that if you look at the figure, even look at, year 2012, the transaction, the resale cases had been drastically reduced when you look at the column 6 months, less than 6 months and 6 months to 12 months. And then for the 12 to 24 months, of course, you still got 7,000 something cases. But among these cases, I thought, most of them actually are not subject to SSD, because when you look at the table 1B, the total cases subject to SSD is only 1,800 something. I don't know whether my analysis is correct or not, because you got all the figures.
Yeah, I'll ask Richard to answer that second one, but can I come back on the first one? When we introduced the measures originally and enhanced the measures and introduced BST this time, the objective was to make a change in the market situation. It wasn't to be defined by a time frame. So, as I think I mentioned at the last Bills Committee, the trigger for us removing these measures will be a package of, prices stabilizing, the market situation changing. We're looking at this package of measures that I've described. We don't have a time frame in mind. I would like that we could say, yes, it's a year, or yes, it's 2 years. But honestly, I can't do that because the fundamental impact on the market is external. Everybody knows that, and we don't control that. So what we're trying to do is to deal with the demand side, but the other factors that we cannot control have a much bigger influence. So I'm afraid I really can't say that we had in mind a time frame. We didn't. We had a target in terms of the market situation. So, Richard, perhaps you can answer the other question.
Next one, Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 points. I'd like the administration to tell me, because in the table on NXA, there were actually more than 100,000 transactions in 2010, but after SAD was introduced, the number of transactions fell. Do you have an estimate that, based on what you just done, is it that if SSD's effect is diminishing, then by 2013, assuming the other factors remain unchanged, then the number of transactions will go up? Or is it that by 2013, to a certain extent, there will be more flats available on the market for sale? If the number of flats increases, then what should we think about property prices? If the supply increases, then the market should react accordingly, right? And secondly, at the same time, we know that the normal SSD, there is also a double SSD in place. I wonder whether, we're talking about this special stamp duty, but we are talking about this issue of SSD and BSD today, but next time, I think we may need to look at another stamp duty, the double stamp duty, the impact of that. I think so. Would you have any estimate on, if the double stamp duty, what impact would the double stamp duty have in the current circumstance? What do you think the impact would be? Who's going to answer?
I'll start, Madam Chairman. I think there's no doubt that as more units come on the market on the supply side, we hope and expect that will have an effect on prices. And that's why we're putting so much effort into try and get more supply both in the private market and the HOS market. I think that's absolutely right. In terms of the impact of what I think you're talking about the changes to the ad valorem stamp duty, which is a slightly different thing. I don't have those figures here with me, to be honest with you, but perhaps we can look at those and give you a reply separately, because I just don't have those figures. As I say, that's out with the exercise today.
Yes, Chairman. Yeah, that stamp duty that I was referring to actually would control the behavior of buyers, would affect the behavior of buyers. So I just wanted to know whether, as we scrutinize, whether we should consider the impact of that particular stamp duty in our scrutiny here as well, so that we can have a more comprehensive discussion. Well, theoretically, there should be a separate bills committee looking at that special stamp duty.
I can comment. The government will be bringing forward legislation on that in due course, and they're working very hard to bring that in. But in any case, the proposals that we're dealing with today, the enhancement to special stamp duty and buyer's stamp duty, have specific targets that would apply regardless of the changes to the ad valorem stamp duty. So I think that they can still be considered separately, even though perhaps some overlap, but it's very minor in this case.
Yeah, later on we'll have a separate bills committee to look at that duty. Yes, of course. Sometimes we need to be careful whether the drugs that we administer is too heavy, or we need to consider whether the measures we use would actually have too detrimental an effect on the market. Affecting people who really want to buy their own homes. And I also like to find out the two bills themselves. Would there be a chance where maybe members from both bills committees can discuss together? So instead of looking one bill after another separately. I believe that there would be a chance for discussion of the latest measure, but maybe not in this bills committee. But should you request? Once the administration has prepared the paper, I don't see any problem of us. I'm sure there may be some overlap in the time for scrutiny. Kenneth? First round of question and answer.
So looking at the figures at Annex A and Annex B, I think the economic dynamics of real estate market in Hong Kong is highly complex. And then I do not think, honestly, the basic economic theory of supply and demand would work perfectly here. As a person with some economics training, I think we are not dealing with perishable goods like vegetables in a defined market. The government obviously cannot control supply and demand at the same time. And even if it wants to control supply or expand supply, it would take a lead time of at least 4 to 5 years. And definitely it is not in a position to control demand either, because obviously what you are doing here is just to increase the transaction costs for people who want to buy these goods called properties. And in fact, I also observe another quite strange phenomenon is that even if you increase the transaction costs, namely special stamp duty here, it does not necessarily mean that the price could come down instantaneously, because these are not perishable goods, because the stocks will not decay. And the assumption I'm making here is that the people who are selling their properties, they're not in dire need of cash. And of course, I agree with also the observation that the price of property in Hong Kong, because it's such an open market, will be determined to a very large extent by the global interest rate. And that is the first, thing which I think will affect the property market, which is outside, of course, the government's control. So after, having all these observations, I've, just one question. Have the government done any regression analysis when you impose the special stamp duty? Regression analysis meaning demand versus stamp duty increase, price sensitivity versus stamp duty increase. Thank you.
Perhaps I can comment and then answer. I think you're right. The biggest impact is the international context that we live in, because interest rates are not controlled in Hong Kong in this regard. But I would say that the philosophy behind the special stamp duty and of course the buyer's stamp duty is to tackle very specific sectors in the marketplace. What we were deliberately trying to do, and I think in terms of the special stamp duty, we had the effect, at least initially, but it has been wearing off, is to target these very short-term speculators. These are people who come in, they buy, they sell, they buy, they sell, and by doing so they create the impression that the market is much more dynamic than it is, and they drive up prices. We wanted to take those out of the market, and I think we've done that. But unfortunately, as I've said, I think the impact has worn off as people have sort of factored that into their buying and selling preference. So I don't disagree with you in terms of the general analysis, but I think you've got to see this in terms of the specific targets that we were attempting to deal with. And I believe that we have been successful. In terms of the economic analysis, yes, in fact, every time we introduce measures, we obviously go through a very detailed process within government to look at the potential impact, for example, looking at the economic impact. Will it have a 1%, 2% impact on GDP, for example, these sort of things. And in that context, we do I'm not sure, because I'm not an economist, exactly what the scale of those analyses are carried out by the government economists for us, but I can assure you we do a very detailed economic analysis.
Kenneth, you have...
主席啊，可唔可以叫佢哋即係
Chairman, can you ask the administration to give us some information on their economic analysis to show us that I'm sure they've done some economic analysis. I'm not asking for a very detailed report, but should they have such data, then I think it would help with our understanding of the issue. Yeah, can you share some data of your analysis with us?
We'll provide an economic analysis for you based on what we have, certainly.
Okay, 不過都係估算啦，大家都明白。
Well, we all know that these are estimates. Okay, next one, Abraham Shack. Let me declare. It's not that I'm against the SSD. Any measure that can curb speculation should be supported. But we can't, support blindly, whatever the government proposes. As electoral member, we're obliged to protect the general welfare interests of the public. Look at the papers today, put before us today. NSA in Table 1A in 2010, 2011, 2012. The subtotal 2055 in 2011, 1806, 2012, 7,929 altogether. It comes to 27,000 short-term transactions. If they were subject to SSD, they would be paying the rates. And yet, somehow, if you look at Table 1B, of the 27,000 short-term cases, only 1,836 were subject to SSD. So, why is this the case? It seems inexplicable to me. Say, of the 1,836 cases, when we had a meeting in 2010, many members were here too. They said that we said that the stamp duty would push property prices up and reduce supply. And that's what happened. Just then, Mr. Prescott, in answering Kenneth's question, he said that he agreed that rates, low rates, agree people's incentive to invest. In 2010, 11, 12, the rates were low. And therefore, throughout the past few years, the lows were raised. And yet, high rates are coming. So let's not talk about the rates. Let's just look at the figures put before us. Look at the figures in NSA. I think they show a big problem there. Of these figures, I think you should not be there to control the demand. Because you've controlled the demand indirectly, you've affected the direct chain, the supply chain. Now you can say that, well, I've sold a lot of land. Well, you want to turn the land into flats. But it takes time for land to be converted into flats. In 2013, 2014, asked real estate developers how many new flats there will be. Ask them. The supply will be very limited. If you are to further reduce the supply, the prices will only go up. Even though there are no transactions, even say from in 2010, 150,000 to 90,000 odd.
So if the supply diminishes, prices will go up. So now I know that the administration wants to see the property market stabilize, but the property market will not stabilize because this is not the real market, so to speak. In the past 2 years, some buyers were affected because in the past 2 years, the property price went up by 35%. I will not put the entire blame on SSD. Yes, supply was not enough, but of course it takes time to increase the supply. 27,000 to 18,000 odd. Can you please explain? Mr. Wong. Mr. Wong.
Comment?
Yeah, I actually agree with Mr. Sheck on this occasion insofar as supply takes time. But I, of course, disagree insofar as an analysis of the effect of SSD on supply. The effect of SSD is to take the buyers out of the market. It doesn't affect the supply. Richard.
主席啊，佢同我講。
No. The demand has always been there. If there is more supply, then prices will go down, people will buy. That's economics. It's not about whether an official wants to agree or disagree. 27,000 to 18,000, can the administration explain? I mean 1,800. Mr. Wong. Chairman, Annex A has two tables. They are on two different things. For table 1A, 2010, 2011, 2012. We analyze the holding period. And note 2 explains that some of the resale cases involve properties acquired before 20th of November 2010. But then they might be sold after the introduction of the SSD, and so they were not subject to SSD. And then table 1B, actual number of cases where SSD was paid, in fact bought after 20th of November 2010 and resale within a certain period, and you can see that the number is 1,836. All right, so I wish to follow up. Please look at Annex B. 2009. Total agreement, number of agreement for sale. Now we talk about 110,000, 132,000. So I think 9,000 odd cases represent only a small percentage, but because of the SSD, people did not provide the supply, and as a result, property prices were pushed up. It's just simple economics, Chairman. You just look at the tables, and you see the real situation. Any response, Chairman? 1A, 2010, subject note 3, that was only about the number in December 2010, because that was the situation after the introduction of the SSD. But then concerning Annex B, 2005 to 2012, the whole year, 2010, 155723, total number of agreements for sale. And then in Annex 1, we've got the figure, and that's 9041, that's only for 1 month. Mr. James Toh. And now I'm beginning to get a bit puzzled. 2011, 96,000 agreements for sale. And then B, 18,000 resale cases. Now let's look at 9649. 9649. Is it part of 96034? Yes. And let me also explain. Annex A, Table 1A, Column A, 2012, 91264. Number of agreements for sale. And then please then look at Annex B, 2012, 91264. Total number of agreements for sale. You can see that the two figures tally. So all right, back to Table 1A first. 2011, total number of agreements for sale 96034, and then we have the 9649. So 9649 is part of 96034. So from 12 to 24 months. 9649. All right, the flats or the properties were sold, but then they were bought say 24 months before. So you have this figure 9649. And then proportion of resale cases. Now this may be a bit misleading. 18006, 96034, that's 18.75%. So 18.75% was resale, you may think. But then 18,006, out of this 18,006, over half, or 9649, were 12 to 24 months. So you really have to look at the number of transactions 2 years before. And so you know how many cases were resold within 24 months. And then if you look at 2009, 2010, we should be talking about a total of 250 or 260,000 in total. And then about 9649 were resold within 2 years. So it should be 9649 as a proportion of the total for 2009 and 2010. Do you understand what I mean, Mr. Wong? It shouldn't be 9649 over 96034. Do you understand what I mean? Yes, I understand, Chairman. But then there were 12 months from 1st January to 31st December. So we might be looking at 4 years before. Yes. So concerning the proportion of resale cases, I don't think this percentage is meaningful for analysis purpose. Because 12 to 24 months, 9649, of course that's part of 96034, but then some of them were purchased a very long time ago, before the 24 months. So we should look at 110,000 plus 140,000. We should look at 9649 in the context of 110,000 plus 140,000. Now in Hong Kong, there are over 1 million items of property. So before 2010, the transaction was 130,000, 140,000, and then in the last 2 years, about 90,000 odd. So during the normal times, for 24 months, bought and then sold, the percentage would be around 10 to 20%. So do you now when at that time, the market was not too heated. The market was not too exuberant. Still, there were 10 to 20% of the cases where there was resale within 24 months. And of course, that phenomenon was due to various reasons. So there was the normal proportion. So I would regard that as the norm. Then we should look at whether in the past few years, the figure was higher. SSD, all right, 12 to 24 months, 5%. Was it that the percentage went up? Now 6 months. Now you can see that after SSD, very few people did that. 6 to 12 months with SSD, few people did that. But then 12 to 24 months, we found the so-called norm. And then we want to look at whether the impact is reasonable. And do we really need to enhance the rate for 12 to 24 months? So we shouldn't just say, 10 to 20%, not normal. Because previously, it was also 10 to 20%. I mean, resale within 12 to 24 months.
邊位回應呢？
Who can reply?
I think Mr. To has more or less analysed the situation. I'm not entirely sure I'm following it 100%, but I think that's because the figures, as he's pointed out, are quite complex. Maybe what we need to do is to try and produce more specific figures dealing with the periods that we're talking about, because the figures, the tables that we're working off, obviously in response to members' request, but what we'll try and do is perhaps show what Mr. Toh has just described. Can we do that?
我相信都有相當困難嘅，因為
They're quite difficult because for one transaction, if you have to find out when the property was purchased and then compare the stamp duty in that year, for example, Annex B, 2010, total number of agreements 155723, and then 96034. Maybe for the 24 months, some were purchased among the 155723, and then 96034 for the 12 months cases that may fall within the 155723, because our computer system doesn't provide for this function, and so we may have to do it manually, and I believe that will be extremely manpower intensive.
We'll work with them and try and come up with something, but obviously it depends on practicality in that case. Okay.
Yeah.
OK。
But,
胡志偉議員。
Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Yes, thank you. Now, assuming that we do not, is it that without this extension, then if the SST ends, then maybe supply in the secondary market will increase? No. Now we also have the BSD. We also have to discuss BSD. Now BSD targets non-Hong Kong permanent residents, and then companies, I understand, are not exempted. So I understand that the demand may be reduced. So if the if the SSD begins to lose its effect, then I think there should be more supply in the secondary market. Because in the past year, it was said that property prices rose, although the number of transactions was relatively small. Now, in the secondary market, the number of flats supplied has been reduced, and I want to say that this phenomenon will continue because of the enhanced tax and other things. Now I understand that you want to curb speculative activities, you want to target non-Hong Kong PR buyers, and then meanwhile we have new supply in the primary market, and we hope that there will also be adequate supply in the secondary market. And according to the basic economic principles, that will help the demand supply situation. I wonder whether you would comment on this analysis.
And react in this way. There is, I think, two different issues that we're talking about. One is the number of transactions in the market, and those are recorded in these figures. That's the number of times a particular property is registered as a transaction. The other set of figures are the number of properties that are on the market. And as you know, some properties can be on the market for a long time and not sell. Some properties are put on the market and sold very quickly. What we're trying to do is to stop a situation where one property on the market is sold, and then sold, and then sold, and then sold. So it's one property, but it's sold 3 times in a short space of time. That's actually only one property on the market. Doesn't increase the size of the market. And we think that special stamp duty has that effect because it stops these people selling quickly that single property. It doesn't increase the size of the market at all. So I think that's where perhaps there is an issue. We need to be able to recognize that what we're talking about is the number of transactions in the market as opposed to the supply of units in the market. As far as the overall supply, I think, as I've said before repeatedly, the overall supply, that's this hand, isn't changed at all by the special stamp duty. The number of transactions is. It reduces the number of transactions because that one property isn't sold 3 times. I think that's a fair analysis. Now, coming to the buyer's stamp duty, what we're doing there, again, is taking out of the market all of these people that have been coming in from overseas with money because they are looking for somewhere to invest their money with a good return. And the property market in Hong Kong has been a good return, there's no doubt. I mean, the Honourable Member earlier indicated that it's been going up, whatever, 35%. It's a huge return on investment. So if a property market shifts within, say, 35% in 1 year, and the additional cost that we're putting on is less than 35% or less than the amount that a person is prepared to take as their profit, then we're not going to have the effect. Hence, we feel that to continue to have that effect on special stamp duty, you have to increase the rates. And on buyer's stamp duty, we want to add additional cost to those people who are coming in from overseas to take them out of the market. So that at the end of the day, the market really is intended to allow Hong Kong people to have the priority. And that concept is still there. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I think that's the model that we're looking at.
Chairman, I feel that in the market, the absolute supply is unchanged in the market. But for people who are willing to sell the flats, this is part of the secondary market, and it will actually this is the part I'm trying to look at, the part of a market where there are flats available. I know the absolute supply in the market is unchanged. It won't be changed until we have more land and we have built more flats. But we can't deny that through various taxes and measures, the number of flats or people willing to sell their flats could be changed. So I just want to point out that if this part of supply returns to normal, and together with the SSD, and if we can take away the demand from the overseas buyers, and if we were to introduce the additional stamp duty that we mentioned earlier, the separate stamp duty, special stamp duty that we mentioned, then I think we may not need to extend the period for the SSD in order to get more supply of flats that people are selling. So I'm saying that the market could actually adjust itself.
I agree to the extent that if this were trying to tackle the supply side, but again I come back to the point that these measures are very definitely specifically targeting the demand side from those particular areas. The key to supply in the primary market is more land so that there can be more units built. In the secondary market, I think it's a market that's more stable and that people can take a decision based on their actual need as to whether they need to sell or whether they want to buy. I'm not sure that these measures, SSD and BSD, has that effect. I'm reluctant to comment on the changes to the ad valorem stamp duty, but I think I would point out what the Financial Secretary has said. He's put in place measures that would increase the cost of all transactions across the board, except for those genuine buyers who need to use a property for themselves, the people who don't have any other property. Again, the concept is very specific. We're targeting a different group here. What we're saying is, look, in the current market, it really is getting to the point where it's going to have some effect on the economy. Be careful. But if you really have a genuine need then, and you fall within the categories that will be specified, this will not apply to you. So in terms of the supply, I don't think it'll have that much effect. But obviously that's a different discussion, Madam Chairman.
石禮謙議員。
Abraham Sheck. Chairman, please don't ask the administration to waste so much time compiling the figures. There's an English saying that statistics are lies. They can interpret the statistics any way they like. So let's just look at one thing. Look at Annex A. Look at the 1B. You can see SSD actually already has an effect. So the number dropped drastically. But then who will show the cost of the SSD? Of course, they are the buyers. In 2011, 2012, of the 180,000 buyers there, they had to pay more. And Mr. Pascal said some people who sell a flat 1 or 3 times of the 96,000 or 91,000 cases, well, what kinds of buyers were these people? We need to know. We can't just make general assumptions here. Let's look at NSB. NSB, since 2007, what's the amount of supply in the market? Look at the transactions. It of course, determined by the number of transactions. You don't know how many flats there were in the market, but you can tell by the number of transactions. In 2007, there were 18,000 new flats, and second-hand flats there were 120,000. 08, 9,000 new flats, and old flats 120,000. And 2011, 12,000 new flats. Second-hand clothes, 143,000. And then 2011, we had the SSD. So it may not all be related to SSD, but still, we still have about 10,000 new flats. And secondary flats fell to 85,000. In 2012, we have 12,000 new flats. And the secondary flats fell to 78,000 odd. So you can say that the number of secondary flats fell throughout the years. Well, there's just a certain limit. There just can be that many new flats every year. But with the overall supply falling, prices were pushed up. So prices that used to be at $8,000 rose to like 10,000 in Yunnan because of a lack of supply, and secondary flats became more expensive as well. Or second-hand flats became more expensive, so that we listen to handset. In 2010, in our meeting in October, we said that SSD targets at speculation, but we would have to pay the cost or the price of rising property prices with SSD because it would reduce the supply. Those were what we said. I think Mr. Pascal has to show us evidence of number of flats that were sold and then sold and then sold again. We need to give us actual figures. So even if you extend the period to 36 months, is it too heavy a measure? It doesn't really affect the primary flats because there are just that many flats every year. People sell the flats for profit. The higher profit, the better. But for second-hand flats, if the supply is reduced, then it would affect the actual market, overall market. So actually, you can tell us whole story in NXP. I don't know what Table 1A is trying to tell us, and the figures are very misleading. I find it surprising that the government can come up with such figures. But particularly proportion of resale cases B over A. If you have 18, if you divide it, put 18,000 over 96,034. All these, I think all these figures, I rather they not give us the figures. I rather they give us accurate figures. I don't want to see the government wasting resources like this again. Just then Kenneth asked, have they done a sensitivity test to look at the impact? I think we need to know the impact. Duncan.
The figures that we produced, Annex A, 1A and 1B, were in response to members' requests specifically. We didn't dream the figures up, we were replying to members' requests. So if any confusion, it's because of the request, not the way the figures have been presented. Secondly, I did answer the Honourable Member to say that yes, we have done economic analysis, and I've also undertaken to try and provide those economic analyses to members. The third point is that unfortunately, Annex B really only shows the number of transactions. It doesn't show the supply in the market. And I think the Honourable Member would agree with me that there's always a difficulty in determining the number of supply in the market at any particular time or over time. So we look at the number of transactions. But within any transaction table, you are going to have multiple transactions on individual units. That's just the way the market works. And I don't know if Inland Revenue Department captures that information, but if it does, we can of course produce it.
Madam Chairman.
That information?
Madam Chairman.
Wang Sang.
Hi.
Mr. Wong. Hi, I'll make 2 points. The table does not reflect whether a unit has been resold and sold many times during a period of time. There's a chance that this is what happened, that a unit has been resold and resold again. But the proportion in Table 1, you need to know that there needs to be a buyer and seller for a transaction to happen. So therefore, in 2012, we have a number of people buying and selling of the 91,264. There were actually 7,929 resale sellers and buyers. So, but when someone bought a flat, we had no idea whether this property would be resold later in 12 months or what. So out of the 91,264 cases, of them, 7,929 were sold within 12 months. So that's how we came to the percentage. Chairman, if you look at 7,382 resale cases, and out of the, but this is out of the total of 91,264. So that's I don't think it's meaningful to argue your presentation of B over A in arriving at a proportion. I know what I'm talking about. I think it's meaningless to debate this. But my point is, of the 27,000 odd short-term transactions and out there, and you said that, Mr. Pascal said, there were 1,836 SSD cases, but you had no idea what the supply level was, what the actual supply was. But the point remains that if you have limited supply, prices will stay high. That's the situation in the past 2 years. In 2011, 2012, that's the situation. Prices were really up in the past 2 years. If not, then the government need not have introduced enhanced measures. So there's no need for debate. You keep saying that your measures are successful. I can say you're successful too, but you pay a heavy price for your success. That is the cause of 180,000 buyers who needed to pay more. You need to get 90% of the buyers to pay a lot more for the sake of the 2% of speculators. That's your view. But I'm stating the fact. That's more than my view. I'm stating a fact. If you look at the increase in prices in the past 2 years, you know. Abraham Sheck, you've cited a series of figures. Could you give the figure to us for reference as well about supply of primary and second-hand flats? I think I was just reciting to you figures in NSB. They are not my own figures. I was just citing figures in NSB. Primary market, secondary market overall. Those columns. And from 2005 to 2012, you could see that in Hong Kong, the total number of agreements for sale, all those figures are there in the table. I think the darkest days were from 2005 to 2012. In 2006, that's when the financial tsunami struck, and it dropped to 96,000 in terms of total number of agreement for sales. And because of SSD, the total number of agreement for sales dropped to 91,000 in 2012. We don't know about the figure this year. We'll know later. But what I was trying to tell you is that there has been an impact on the market. You have to accept the fact that the market was impacted.
It cannot possibly be shown from these figures that the impact on the market of SSD has been so dramatic as to reduce the numbers. The reduction in the number of transactions must relate to the price, and the price has been driven up, as we've explained many times, by exceptionally low interest rates, by the influx of money from overseas, by a lack of supply in the market, in the primary market, driving up prices in the secondary market. Those are the reasons why the prices are going up. Absolutely, I cannot accept that it's due to...
Madam President, the interest rate has been steady. Madam President, the market has also been very steady had it not been the SSD. I'm not against the SSD, but I'm just telling the truth. Madam President, and also that he cannot just be selectively and blame it on the exchange, the interest rate, as such that the information are all already in the NXB.
I'm sorry,
Madam President.
Now,
I think your views are clear. Now, because you talk about the total number of agreements for sale, but Duncan doesn't agree that this is the supply. No. Now, do you know why prices have gone up? That's because the supply has been reduced. This is simple economics, Chairman. I believe you know economics, supply and demand. That's in the Form 4 economics textbook. You can't change it. You know, I understand that there is something called inelastic, but this is the mass market. If the supply is reduced, prices will go up. We understand your comment. This is not my comment. I don't want the administration to say something that is not the truth.
So what, 1% below prime, and prime is about, what, 2%? Compared to the long-term averages of 6 to 10%, that's a huge difference. That's the biggest impact on the ability of people to buy, is the fact that it doesn't cost them very much to raise the money. That's the most important thing. The second thing is there is a huge amount of money flooded in. We know this. It's come in from overseas. You have to deal with that problem. The third thing is, yes, I agree with you. Supply has been constrained for a number of years now. And that is definitely one of the factors. But it's three different factors, not the minor impact of SSD. I think that's where we differ.
I don't disagree with you, but I'm just using the SSD with everything at a standstill. The QE1, QE2, QE3 came over a number of years. It does just come out suddenly. And secondly, if you're talking about the interest rate is such an evil, why didn't our FS this morning on the radio defend the link? The link is part of the whole interest rate. I mean, if you want to discuss with economics with you, I'm very happy to do it, but not on this platform.
Okay,
Thank you.
多謝你啊，石議員。咁我哋俾一謝偉全議員。
All right, thank you. Mr. Tony Chair, please. We are told that extraordinary measures are needed in extraordinary times. I agree. And I agree that at this moment in time, demand-side management measures are necessary. But I just hope that the administration will pay attention to changes that are taking place in the market. And I of course hope that you can really achieve what you want to achieve. Can I ask Duncan to look at 1A? Now, for these transactions, how many of them were subject to SSD? How many of them were cases where SSD was paid? Especially 2012, 12 to 24 months, 7,382. I believe many were not subject to SSD. So can you provide us with the figure? How many of these cases were subject to SSD? In how many cases were SSD payable? I'll give the information to members later. All right, members, any further questions? Now, that's all for this paper. I think Mr. Abraham Shack, you have your observation. I understand your observation, but it seems that it's difficult for you and the officials to see eye to eye. Now, of course, to a certain extent, SSD does suppress supply. But then does it mean that because of SSD, prices have risen? Now, Chairman, I'm not saying that the other factors are not relevant. I'm just saying that for the other factors, they have been there. But then with SSD, the number of transactions has gone down. I'm not asking them to agree with me. I just want to make sure that my observation is put on record. In fact, when the SSD was introduced, I said, and that was recorded in the Hansard, I said that, in fact, prices would rise. But then, you know, prices rose by 35% within a 2-year period. Developers also want to see a stable market. I'm just saying that officials are doing some bad things, so to speak, out of good intentions. And do you know that what they do affect all the owners, prospective buyers? I'm not asking them to agree with me. I just want to have my remarks put on record. Now, I just want to say that I do not need the government's endorsement of my remarks. I just want to say what I want to say. Okay. Mr. Abraham Shack and Mr. Tony Chair have pointed out that redevelopment might be affected, and in fact, Mr. Tony Chair has already written a letter to us. So perhaps you can give a response next time. In fact, some deputations also made a similar point. So I hope that you will make sure that your measure will not bring up the cost of redevelopment, because redevelopment can increase supply. And if you do a blow to redevelopment, then supply will be affected, Mr. Shack, right? Chairman, I think we haven't completed the discussion of this paper. We haven't touched on BSD. Yes, I think that we can discuss BSD next time. Concerning whether the SSD should be enhanced, now, members have different views, so next time let's deal with BSD. So I think we can adjourn the meeting today. Thank you very much. Thank you.